إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله وصفيه من خلقه وحبيبه اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. Inshallah, the hero that we will be studying today is a bit different to some of the heroes we have already looked at. For example, Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak or Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. All these people were known for their knowledge. But the hero today, he may not have been a scholar by words or through his knowledge, but he was rather a scholar through his actions. He is a man by the name of Shakh Tamim Al-Adnaani. And like all the other personalities, like Sayyid Qutb for example, he is not famous, he did not write a book of tafsir, and he is not well heard of. He was born in Jerusalem, Palestine in 1942. His grandfather was Khurshid Pasha, who was the governor of Jerusalem at that time. And his father was Muhammad Al-Adnaani, who was a famous Palestinian poet, and the family and the lineage of Shaykh Tamim was a very noble and high family. Shaykh Tamim was brought up in Aleppo in a secondary school. In a secondary school, while he was there, he decided to grow his beard. And he would have a conflict with his father regarding this issue. And his father would say, "You are a young man. How can you grow your beard? You may not get married. It's not right for you to grow a beard." But despite this, he kept his beard. And then Shaykh Tamim, he visited Shaykh Ahmad al-Harran in Damascus. And then on meeting the Shaykh said, "Oh my son, do not make your father angry, obey him and shave off your beard." And Shaykh Tamim was very surprised. How come that this Shaykh in Damascus knows about this incident, all the way in Aleppo? Is this as if the Shaykh is saying, you're still young and the beard will cause you problems for you in the future? But the point to be taken from this incident is that Shaykh Tamim, he had love for the deen, love for Islam at a young age. After his studies in school, he went to Cairo University to study politics. At the university, there was once a large conference held by the socialist unions. And because his father was a famous Arab nationalist poet, they invited him to come to give a talk at this socialist union conference. And Shaykh Tamim, when he arrived at the scene, he saw, for example, that it was a mixed gathering. There were men and women that were mixing and free mixing. And having been forced to speak, he then says this to Shaykh Abdullah Azzam. He said, "I spoke about socialism and nationalism, and that there is no socialism and nationalism." And when Shaykh Tamim remembers this, he laughed his famous laugh, which is like ho ho ho. And if any of you have seen a picture of him, you can imagine how this man would have laughed. He said, "I messed up the gathering, and so because of this, they kicked me out basically out of this gathering." Now, we have to realize that Shaykh Tamim, he messed up this gathering of Arab socialists and Arab nationalists at a time when there was a complete crackdown by the Arab nationalists and socialists against any Islamists. And for example, in the universities, it was very rare to even see one woman wearing hijab. At Cairo University, Shaykh Tamim met the Syrian Marwan Hadid al-Shahid, who was studying agriculture in Cairo University also. But because of his association with Marwan al-Hadid, the authorities would follow him. And there are very funny stories regarding how the incidences that Shaykh Tamim would have with the authorities. For example, sometimes the authorities, the intelligence agencies, they would follow him on the bus. And Shaykh Tamim, he would wait for the bus to be completely full, and when it is very full, he would get on, and then as the intelligent officer is about to get on, he will push him and then say, "Sorry, there is no space for you." And other incidences, for example, Shaykh Tamim, he was about to pay his fare and he goes, this is my fare, and also here is the fare of the intelligence officer who is behind me, so that everybody knows that with him is an intelligence officer. And when he would sit down, the intelligence officer would say, why did you do this and embarrass me? And Shaykh Tamim, he replied, I just wanted to relieve you of the burden of paying, so I paid for you so that you don't have to pay. After completing his master's degree, Shaykh Tamim, he looked for work. His brother-in-law used to work in a bank and offered him a job at the bank, but Shaykh Tamim, he refused to work at the bank because of his dealing in interest. And he even would refuse to have tea at the house of his sister. And that is because he would say, the one whose money is haram, then also his food is haram. Eventually, Shaykh Tamim, he found a job as an English teacher in a boys and girls school. And at that school, he noticed one female pupil who was different from all the other girls. She was wearing hijab, she would have a long skirt, she would not free mix and laugh with the boys, and she was different. And so he went and he proposed to the girl. But for Shaykh Tamim's family, this was an insult. That, his father was saying, he was an Arab nationalist, that how could my son, how could he marry someone who is wearing hijab? This is backward. And you find even people today, they say, for example, that to be modern is to go out wearing very fancy clothing, to wear perfume. But really, that is backward. And the people that are wearing the hijab, they are the ones who are modern. After that, Shaykh Tamim, he went and worked for a Saudi-British airplane company in Dhahran in Saudi Arabia. And his job was to be the director of purchases at this company. The boss of this company wanted to test Shaykh Tamim for his honesty and his integrity. So he asked Shaykh Tamim to buy a vacuum cleaner. As Shaykh Tamim was going to buy the vacuum cleaner, the man, the seller, he said, how much shall I write on the receipt? And Shaykh Tamim said, what do you mean, how much shall I write on the receipt? And he said, well, so that you can claim it from your company later. And Shaykh Tamim said, no, write the exact amount. Now when the boss, when Shaykh Tamim came back and he gave him the vacuum cleaner, with the receipt, the boss went to the shop with the receipt. Let's say, for example, it was 500 riyals. And he said, how much, did he pay for it? And the shopkeeper said he paid, for example, 500 riyals. But I did ask him if if I'd like to make a bigger receipt for him, but he refused. And then the director of purchases, the boss of the company, he realized that Shaykh Tamim was a trustworthy man. Now, his company, offered him a salary of 21,000 riyals per month. And that was like 16 years ago. Now, that is about approximately, like $6,000, dollars a month. And now maybe we're talking about, this is equivalent to, in sterling, £8,000 per month, including the house allowances, including education allowances, including travel allowances. So you can imagine how much money this man was making. Now in the airbase, there was a little mosque. And the managers soon realized that Shaykh Tamim, he had some understanding of the deen. And therefore they made him the khatib of the mosque. But Shaykh Tamim, he didn't have any formal training in this sphere. However, because he would speak from his heart, people began to flock to his speeches, even though he was not a scholar. He would speak from the heart and it would reach the hearts of the people. In fact, so many people began to come to his mosque that the mosque had to be extended 4 times to accommodate all the people. One quality about Shaykh Tamim, which is known to everybody who knows him, is that he would always speak the truth, no matter what. If he saw something wrong in the community, he would speak out against it. So for example, when he saw the youth wasting their time in football and missing salah, he began to talk about this, but people began to complain that, don't talk about football, why are you talking about football? And so then he said, okay, and he moved on to another subject. And then he spoke about interest and the banks and the riba that is awash in the country of Saudi Arabia. But the people became upset. And he said, they said, look, don't talk on these controversial issues, don't talk on these hot issues, just talk about the salah and following the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and etc. And Shaykh Tamim said, look, what do you want me to speak about? what do you want me to say? And they said, look, these are sensitive areas, and you are in a sensitive area itself. You are in a military base, and we give you 21,000, riyals per month, and in addition, 3,500 a month as your position of imam, and we can take it away from you. So be careful. Now listen to the answer of Shaykh Tamim. He said, my provision and every penny comes to me from Allah. He gave it to me, and when He wants, He will take it away from me. As for the 3,500 riyals, it came from Allah as a bonus, and it goes back to Allah. Wallahi, I save this money and I give it to the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. And in 1984, whilst he was in Dahran, Shaykh Tamim, he heard of the Afghan Jihad. And this Jihad, it captured his heart. And he looked at all those people, those Afghans, who refused to accept humiliation, and they were giving everything to protect the deen and uphold Islam. And so for these people, Shaykh Tamim, out of his own wish and desire, in his first year, he collected $50,000 from the community, and then in the summer, he gave it to the Mujahideen. Now, Shaykh Tamim, after having given it to the Mujahideen directly, and on his return back to Saudi Arabia, he made a lecture in 1986, and it was called My First Journey in Afghanistan. Now this tape, it sold out, and from the proceeds, Shaykh Tamim, he collected about $250,000, and he handed it to the Mujahideen. In the third year, he announced that in Ramadan he will be collecting money, and he gave a second tape, after returning again from Afghanistan, and this was My Second Journey to Afghanistan, and this tape also sold out, and as a result he collected almost $1 million. And now the authorities, they began to question, they began to think that this is going out of control, and they went to him and they said that we have been given orders that you give this to us and we will then give it to the Mujahideen. And Shaykh Tamim said, he said, over my dead body. They said, what? He said, I said to the people that I will give this money to them with my own hands, and no one is going to come and take this money from me on my behalf. They said, but you are disobeying orders, O Shaykh Tamim, from higher places. He said, my order has already come from Allah. Then they had a dispute, and because Shaykh Tamim, he was big and large, mashallah, he grabbed them by the neck and he started to shake one of them. And he was saying, this is the money of the Mujahideen, this is the money of the Mujahideen, this is the money of the Mujahideen. And then the security officer, he said, listen Shaykh Tamim, I am only doing my job here. By Allah, my wife and daughter, they give money to the Mujahideen and they listen to all your lectures. Then in the following day, some of the good ones from amongst the security officers, they came to him again. And they said, listen, Shaykh Tamim, you can take the money and you can hand it directly to the Mujahideen. However, when you travel, do not tell anybody about it and go quietly. So then he said, okay. Then on the following Friday in khutbah, Shaykh Tamim, he made the following announcement. He said, Insha'Allah, on Wednesday, by Pakistan International Airways, flight PK, for example, 745 at 22:30 in the evening, at this time, Shaykh Tamim will be leaving to give money to the Mujahideen. So whoever wants to make his wife a widow, or his child an orphan, or his mother childless, then let him meet me at the airport. And then afterwards, after the khutbah, everyone came to him and said, oh Shaykh Tamim, what is this? What have you done? Do you want to make all our, our wives widows and our children orphans and our mothers childless? And, this, and then Shaykh Tamim said, no, I didn't mean yours, but I meant, the communists. And they said that inshallah, may Allah fulfill your requests. And by the way, that statement that Shaykh Tamim made, this was the very same statement that Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu made as he was leaving for the Hijrah. while all the other Sahaba, they're going quietly without telling anybody and drifting slowly into Medina. Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, he announced to the people and he said, if any person wants to make their wife a widow, or their children orphans, or their mother, leave them childless, then let him meet me at this valley at that time. Now in Afghanistan, Shakh Tamim, he would participate in the battles. And some of the people that witnessed him in the battles, they would say that, whenever there was be an aerial bombing and everyone would get down, but we couldn't tell because of his large weight whether Shaykh Tamim, he was, if he was standing up or if he was lying down, because mashallah, he was, just as he was tall, he was horizontally, he was, the same sort of size. So you couldn't really tell if he was like, lying down or standing up, because he weighed 155 kilograms. And they would tell him to get down and to duck down. But Shaykh Tamim, he had the disease of obesity. But despite this, he would insist to participate in the battles and to go on top of the mountains. But almost on many occasions, the emirs, they would refuse him because of his weight. And then he would say, bring me a horse. And then when he would sit on the horse, it would be said that the weight of Shaykh Tamim would instill fear into the hearts of the horses even. There was one time he was on the horse, and the horse would, he was going up a mountain ridge. And they were going up a mountain ridge, and the path was only like half a meter wide. And, if any one of them fell, then it was very risky, and any one of them would have died. Then once, one of the emirs, they were sitting, and it was said that Shaykh Tamim has fell off his horse. And the emir said, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. What has happened? And what had happened is that a branch came and it hit Shaykh Tamim and knocked him off his horse. Now as he fell, he was holding onto the reins and he pulled the horse down with him. And when the emir saw this, the emir began to laugh. And they said, because what would happen is all the young brothers would stay awake all of the night, talking and speaking. And Shaykh Tamim, one of his trademarks was that if any brother would not get up for Salat al-Fajr, he would threaten them and said, I will sit on you. And the emir began to laugh and say, see Shaykh Tamim, all the time you would say that you would sit on your brothers, and now Allah has punished you and has made the horse sit on you. Shaykh Tamim, he was a man of immense tawakkul. For example, whenever he would pass by a checkpoint, he would say, no problem, just read Surah Yasin. Just read Surah Yasin and Allah will let you go through. And he would read, وَجَعَلْنَا مِن بَيْنِ أَيْدِيهِمْ صَدًّا وَمِنْ خَلْفِهِمْ صَدًّا فَأَخْشَيْنَاهُمْ فَهُمْ لَا يُبْصِرُونَ. That we have put in front of them a barrier and behind them a barrier, and over their eyes we have put a cover so that they cannot see. Now, this dua would always work with Shaykh Tamim, and he never had any problems at the checkpoints. But all the other brothers, they had problems at the checkpoints. They would go through and they'd be questioned and then they'd be searched, but Shaykh Tamim, no. And that is because in order for the dua to be effective, you must have belief in the dua. Just like Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, sometimes some Sahaba, they would read Surah Fatiha over a person to cure him, and then it wouldn't work. And Umar ibn Khattab would come and he would read Surah Fatiha and that person would be cured, because he would have belief in this and he had iman in this. And sometimes Shaykh Tamim, for example, he would collect money. He collected gold, several kilograms of gold, and all he would do, he'd cover it and say dua over it. And despite this, none of his bags, all the bags of Shaykh Tamim would be checked, but that bag that had the gold in it for the mujahideen. And that is because of the immense tawakkul that this man had in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, as was mentioned before, Shaykh Tamim, he was not allowed to take part in any of the jihad, really, because of his weight. And the Amir, who was Abu Abdullah, he refused to allow Shaykh Tamim to take part in the jihad. Once it happened that Abu Abdullah, he had to return to Saudi Arabia. And then he left behind the Emir, who was Abu Hajir al-Iraqi. Abu Hajir al-Iraqi, his tapes, you can still listen to them on Islam Online, but at the moment, currently, he is being held in prison in New York, and he was captured just a few years ago. Now, Abu Abdullah was a very firm leader, and he was not a pushover, and he would no way allow Shaykh Tamim to go into the mountain and to partake in the battlefield. Now, Shaykh Tamim, when Abu Abdullah left, he saw his chance and he went to Abu Hajir. And he said to Abu Hajir, look, we should now attack the enemy. And Abu Hajir said, look, I cannot make this decision until Abu Abdullah comes. And Shaykh Tamim was like, we have to go, almost like a kid. And Abu Hajir was put in a difficult position because Shaykh Tamim, he was a very well-respected man. And so Abu Hajir, he let Shaykh Tamim go to the top of the mountain and go with an operation. Now when Abu Abdullah he got back, he inquired, where is such and such a person, where is such a person? And they said, he's here. And he said, where is Shaykh Tamim? And he said, he's on top of the mountain. And he said, what? He said, call him back now. So they phoned Shaykh Tamim, and he was told, your Emir orders you to come back now. And if you do not come back, then you will be disobeying Allah. And then Shaykh Tamim, he refused. And even after being told directly, and eventually he was told that, if anyone falls victim because of what you're doing, then you'll be made responsible by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the Day of Judgment. And then Shaykh Tamim, he returned and he was sulking like a child. And as he returned, he said, I swear by Allah that if you do not let me go, I will not eat, nor will I drink. Now Abu Abdullah, of course, he thought that he was joking and this will pass and he's just emotional. But one day passed, the second day passed, 3 days passed, he was not eating or drinking, and Shaykh Tamim became weak. And then Abu Abdullah, he was in a difficult position, because this man now, he has made an oath. So therefore he reluctantly agreed and let him go to the mountain. And then he went to the mountain and he was allowed to fire a few shots and a few mortars, and then he was asked to return to the base. Now Shaykh Tamim, he made another visit to Saudi Arabia. But this time, he was banned from giving his lecture, My Third Journey to Afghanistan. So he recorded this lecture on tape anyway, but this tape, it became a hit and it sold out. And the authorities, they became enraged and they deported him basically. Shaykh Tamim first went to Qatar. And, alhamdulillah, the people from Qatar, they contributed significantly with their money and the persons to the jihad. Then from Qatar, Shaykh Tamim, he went to Afghanistan, and he said he was going to devote his whole life there, his full time, and his family, everyone was moved to Afghanistan. And then he asked, how will I look after my family? What will I do to look after my family? And then Abu Abdullah, he said, do not worry, I will look after them, just like he had sponsored many of the brothers of the Mujahideen. Now Abdullah Azzam, he said, why don't you work with me, and help me in my work, because I need someone like yourself. Because Shaykh Abdullah Azzam, rahmatullahi alayhi, was in great demand. And there were many times, for example, he couldn't go to different countries and give speeches and lectures because he was busy, with the jihad, with writing books, etc. So therefore Abdullah Azzam, he sent him on many errands. And Shaykh Tamim went to Nigeria, he went to many different places, and everywhere he went, huge crowds would gather. He went all over Europe, he went to America, he went to the African countries, he went to Asia, he went to Bangladesh, he went to Karachi, he went to Pakistan, and wherever he went, newspapers, they would carry news about Shakh Tamim Al-Adnaani and the amount that he had gathered for the Mujahideen. In fact, Shaykh Tamim was so much in demand that one lecture would finish and then there would be another and another and another. And in the United Arab Emirates, he gave a series of 3 lectures, specifically to the women. And by the end of these lectures, he managed to gather 4 to 5 kilograms of gold. And he would say to every sister, by Allah, for every sister, I will tell the Mujahideen to make dua for you. Because, generally, the women, they are more sensitive in their hearts. and the jihad captured many of the women's hearts, and they would take the gold by their hand, and they, and they would give it. And Shaykh Tamim, he would take the gold through his own hand, he would put it in a bag, he would make dua, he would cover the bag, and he would never ever be stopped. Regarding the courage, and personality of Shakh Tamim Al-Adnaani, he was a very, very, very brave man. And he would not fear anybody except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There was an incident in immigration in one of the Arab countries, perhaps the United Arab Emirates, although we're not told, where he saw an official who did not allow a Palestinian to enter because he did not have a visa. And then on another line, a Westerner came, and the official asked him, do you have a visa? And he said no. And then he was given the visa there and then, and he was allowed to enter. And then when Shaykh Tamim, he saw this, he said, no, I will not allow this. And he grabbed the two passports. And he said, look at this. Look at this. The Muslim is not allowed to enter, and the Kafir, he is allowed to enter. And after he made, a big fuss about the incident and about the issue, eventually he was, allowed, to stop and to go through. Now, Shaykh Tamim, from Nigeria, he was on his way to Yemen, and he stopped in Egypt. And the Egyptian police force, they wanted to interview him there. And they said to him, who are you and where are you going? And he said very frankly, I am with the Mujahideen and I am going to Afghanistan. He said, I am a frank person and I'll give you frank answers. So do not beat around the bush with me. So then they asked him, are there any Egyptians in Afghanistan? He said, yes. He said, Abu Muhammad, Abu Ibrahim, Abu Abdullah, Abu Anas, and these names. And they said, are you joking with us? Are you joking with us? He said, look, I don't know their names. I just know their kunyas. And even if I did know their names, over my dead body will I give it to you. Then they said to him, do you know Muhammad al-Islambuli, the brother of Khalid Islambuli? And Khalid Islambuli, he was the one who assassinated Sadat, who made the peace with Israel. He said, is there anyone who does not know the brother of the hero Khalid Islambuli? And then while this was happening, while this was going on, he put those who were interviewing on the back foot, and he began to ask them, can I have permission to do lectures while I'm here in Egypt, while I'm here in Cairo? Do you give me the permission? Can I do it? So he was interrogating them rather than them interrogating him. Anyway, they let him into the country, and despite being banned to give lectures, he still gave the lectures anyway. After this, Shaykh Tamim Al-Adnaani, one thing about him is that he would hear of the oppression, of the women, and the rape of the women. He would hear, for example, how the Russians, they would take them in the helicopters, they would rape them, and then throw them down. And he would cry and weep, as if this had happened to his own children. Then in Ramadan, April 1987, the famous Lion Den operation happened. Basically, the base camp of the Mujahideen, called Ma'sada, which is in the eastern Afghanistan, in Jaji. At that time, the Russians battalions made a concerted ground and air attack to destroy the base camp of the Mujahideen. Basically, 2,000 of the enemy had gathered, and there are only 50 of the brothers that were there protecting the base. They included people like Shaykh Abdullah Azzam, Shaykh Tamim Al-Adnaani, Abu Zubayr Al-Madani, the famous Nasheed singer, including Osama bin Laden, many of the prominent Mujahideen. Now, Abu Abdullah, he gave Shaykh Tamim the responsibility for communications. Now, the most concerted effort by the Russians took place on the 28th to the 30th of Ramadan. And Shaykh Tamim, during this phase, during this moment, during the most intense part of the bombardment, he would come out of his bunker and he'd read the Quran. And when he would go and read the verses of the hellfire, he would read them quickly. And as he was passing through the verses of paradise, he would read them slowly. He read 1 juz, 2 juz, 3 juz, until 6. He reached 6 juz. And even the branches above his head were shaking from the bullets and the bombs that were whistling above his head. And then, he was told, what are you doing? This is haram. Abdullah Azzam, he said to him that this is haram. You can't just, if you want to become Shaheed, that's understandable, but you can't just put yourself like this at risk. And he said, is this really haram? And then he quickly went back to his base. And then Abu Abdullah, he gave the order to withdraw. And only the Mujahideen at that situation, at that time, they know why they're withdrawing from a certain place. Because basically it was 50 versus 2,000, a ratio of 1 to 40. Now when Tamim Al-Adnaani heard of this, he began to cry like a child. And he said, look, what? After all this time, after all the efforts we have put in building and making this camp, now you want us to leave? And he began to cry like a child. And he was holding onto his hair, and he's holding his beard, and it looked like, people said, like as if some sort of jinn had taken over him. And he would cry, and he would cry, and he'd refuse to come. But then Shaykh Abdullah told him, listen, if anything happens to these brothers, then this is on your neck, and you are going to be made responsible. Shaykh Tamim, he was looking for a way to further participate in the jihad. So he decided that he was going to go, to try and lose some weight. And he went from Nigeria to Egypt, and from Egypt he went to Qatar. And there, some of the brothers, they said to him that we know of a doctor in Czechoslovakia who can reduce your weight to 90 kilograms. And then they said that rather, why don't you in fact go to America for medical treatment? Because in America there are better doctors. And so Shakh Tamim Al-Adnaani, he went to America. And while he was going to America, he didn't just sit around waiting for his operation to happen and living the life in America, going around touring and doing all this. No. Rather, he went to, conferences and camps, and every single place that he went to and he was due to speak in, it sold out everywhere. And he would phone, once a week to Abdullah Azzam, and he would say, look, wait for me, I'm coming. I've lost 5 kilograms. I've lost this many kilograms. I've lost this many kilograms. And eventually, he lost, he came down to 109 kilos. But one day, he was going to deliver a lecture in Orlando, Florida, on the 18th of October, 1989. And then on the way to the hospital, he on the way he had a heart attack, on the day, and on his way to the hospital he died. And his body was brought back, from Orlando through New York to Islamabad to Peshawar, and eventually the graveyard in Pabi, where many of the Mujahideen leaders, they are buried. So therefore we see that Shaykh Tamim, his intention all the time was to return to jihad and to fight, to reduce his weight. And every week he was phoning the Shaykh Abdullah Azzam, saying, I'm coming, wait for me. He didn't go there for tourism. He didn't go there to waste his time. He went there, with the intention of performing jihad fi sabilillah. Now, amongst the miracles that were experienced after his death, his body was weeping 24 hours after his death while he was still in America. His wife went to the room in which he passed away, in the hospital room, and she said to him, we will meet in paradise, O Abu Yasir. This was his kunya, Abu Yasir. And then Abu Tariq, who was also there, he said, as she said this, tears came out of the body of Shaykh Tamim Al-Adnaani, and they fell on the sheets. And she dried those tears with a handkerchief. And I also dried them. So he's witnessing this event, and he's saying that this had happened. Now, also, it was said, from the hospital bed, a wonderful smell of perfume had emanated from the body of Shaykh Tamim. And some of the people, they said to him, what nice perfume have you put on his body? And they said, look, well, what do you mean? What perfume? We haven't put any perfume on his body. Then it was noted about his body that it had not bloated, nor had it discolored. Now Shaykh Abdullah Azzam, he found many prominent sheikhs and mashayikh and ulama asking about the permissibility of burying the body in a coffin, as 48 hours had passed. The Shaykh bin Baz, he said, if it has changed and it's giving off a smell, then yes, you need to bury it in a coffin. As for other sheikhs, for example Abdul Razzaq al-Afifi, he said, look, of course the body is going to change, so therefore you have to bury it in a coffin. Although the body was not bloated and was not smelling, they decided to put him in a coffin, but even the lid of the coffin, because of, mashallah, the size of Shaykh Tamim, they couldn't even shut the coffin, and they had to put his arms on the sides and then put the lid on the coffin like this. Now Shaykh Abdullah Azzam said about Shakh Tamim Al-Adnaani. Shaykh Abdullah Azzam, he died 1 month after Shakh Tamim Al-Adnaani, and in the last book that he ever wrote, called Ushaq Al-Hur, the lovers of the paradise maidens, in which he compiled more than 100 stories of the people that had become martyrs in Afghanistan, and all the titles, they always start with Ash-Shaheed. Ash-Shaheed Abu Muhammad, Ash-Shaheed Abu Ibrahim, Ash-Shaheed Umar, for example. And all the titles, they begin with Ash-Shaheed. Now the last story that he mentions is given the title Ash-Shaheed Al-Batal Al-Shaykh Tamim Al-Adnaani, the martyr, the hero, the Shaykh Tamim Al-Adnaani. Now you see that Abdullah Azzam, rahmatullahi alayhi, he called him Shaheed. Now he wasn't killed in a battle in Afghanistan or in Chechnya, or he didn't step on a landmine, or he wasn't, blown up by hellfire missile. Rather he died of all places in America. So why is it that Shaykh Abdullah Azzam, rahmatullahi alayhi, calls him Shaheed? Why does he call him a hero? The reason, very simply, is because of his intentions. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said about the muhajir and the one who makes hijrah, who goes forth in the path of Allah and is killed, he said that this man is a shaheed. He said, whoever emigrated in the way of Allah, or was killed, or stung by a poisonous insect, or died on his bed by any death that Allah wills, then he is shaheed. So Shaykh Abdullah Azzam, he said, whoever emigrated to assist this matter for the sake of Allah's deen and came and came to help and found difficulty, then he is a muhajir for the sake of Allah. He said that Allah has ordained that men should die many different ways, but their status after death will depend on their intentions. So their status will depend on their intentions. Now even one who dies, like a shaheed, and he's fought in the battles and he falls with a bullet through his head, that man, he may even go to the hellfire because of his intentions. Like the famous hadith of the first 3 people that will go to the hellfire. And a man who dies on his deathbed may be taken to the ranks of the shaheed, even though he is not on the battlefield because of his intention. He said, amongst the people, anyone who leaves his house for the sake of Allah and is thrown off his riding beast, or afflicted with disease, or any type of death that comes to him, this person is indeed a shaheed because of his intention, because he did it only for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Shaykh Abdullah Azzam, he wrote a wonderful tribute about Shaykh Tamim Al-Adnaani, and he wrote, you will not die, and how will you die when your memories fill our lives and shake us from our depths? Your voice, which roars on the cassette, is enough to shake the world of the enemies of Allah and cause their hearts to tremble. He does not die for whom there remains in this world positions which the great people, the callers and the scholars of Islam even shrink in front of. He will not die the one that carries with him the most noble of problems, that ignited his heart and inflamed his chest with a flame, with a torch which he carried to others, with passionate speeches that came from the hearts and therefore reached the hearts by Allah's permission. You are not a writer with a bewitching style, but your words had magic that captured the hearts. You are not a scholar, but Allah taught you with extensive knowledge of fiqh. Allah taught you, although maybe not with extensive knowledge of fiqh, He taught you what would benefit you and would benefit the people through you. You are not the horseman that mounts horses in the fields, and yet the horsemen stand dwarf in front of your courage. This man was not a well-known faqih or scholar, but I found in him a quality, as I perceive and Allah knows best, that made his speech accepted by the people, and Allah knows best, and that was sincerity. Sincerity is a spirit of words and the life of example. As with sincerity, words leave the heart and so therefore reach the hearts with passion and influence. Shakh Tamim was a normal man, but Allah blessed his words such that Afghanistan and the Afghan issue became a worldwide issue and problem. And he was, without doubt, one of the main contributors to the Afghan Jihad. The Shaykh Tamim, he only went to America with the intention to reduce his weight. And while there, he incited the believers even to do jihad. Even there. And because of the intentions and the actions he was doing, because of this, he deserves to be placed amongst the shuhada. Like the hadith, whosoever sincerely wished for martyrdom, Allah will raise him to the ranks of the martyr, even if he was to die on his bed. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have mercy on Shaykh Tamim, and to forgive him, and to forgive all the mujahideen in his path, and to accept him amongst the ranks of the martyrs. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to benefit from his life and his example, to make us sincere in our intentions, to make us act with what we know, to make us a living embodiment of what is required by us in his book and in his sunnah. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم وجزاكم الله خيرا.